The Forge philosophy. How to build unbreakable values. What is the forge? Imagine standing in a blacksmith's workshop. The fire roars, the hammer strikes. Raw metal transforms into something stronger, sharper, more useful. That's what humans do with meaning. We forge it. The Forge philosophy says there are no objective moral truths waiting to be discovered. No cosmic instruction manual exists. Instead, we actively construct values through a specific process: faith, logic, and conflict. This isn't nihilism, it's the opposite. If meaning doesn't exist, we must create it. If values aren't given, we must forge them. The framework emerged from pattern recognition across history. Every successful ethical system, every resilient ideal, every value that survives across cultures follows the same three-step process. Faith provides the starting point, the commitments we choose as foundation. Logic builds provisional structures of reason and strategy on that foundation. Conflict stress tests everything, destroying what's weak and hardening what's strong. Think of it as conscious evolution for ideas. Natural selection happens whether we understand it or not. But understanding it lets us work with the process rather than being randomly shaped by it. The Forge philosophy makes meaning creation deliberate rather than accidental. This isn't just philosophy for philosophers. Everyone is already forging values whether they realize it or not. You choose what matters, build arguments around those choices, and reality tests whether your values actually work. The difference is consciousness. Understanding the process means you can direct it. The goal isn't finding absolute truth with a capital T. The goal is creating values resilient enough to survive reality's hammer. Ideas that work across contexts, that adapt without breaking, that generate more good than harm over time. Not perfect, functional, not eternal, durable. Over these 10 parts, we'll explore each element of the Forge, understand how they work together, and learn to use this framework consciously. By the end, you won't just understand the Forge philosophy. You'll recognize yourself as a forge, creating meaning in real time. The fire's already burning. Let's learn to use it. The problem, why we need the Forge. Here's the uncomfortable truth: the universe doesn't care about you. It has no opinion on justice, no preference for kindness, no built-in reward system for good behavior. Gravity doesn't distinguish between dropping a baby and dropping a rock. Reality is indifferent. For most of human history, we dealt with this by pretending otherwise. We created God's natural law, cosmic order, anything to avoid the terrifying conclusion that we're making it all up. Divine command gave us certainty. Natural rights gave us foundation. Universal truths gave us comfort. But that comfort came at a cost. When you claim your values are objective truths discovered rather than constructed, you can't adapt them when they fail. You can't learn from mistakes, because mistakes mean you weren't following the objective truth closely enough. Systems claiming divine authority become rigid, brittle, unable to evolve. The alternative isn't nihilism, though many people assume it is. If there's no cosmic meaning, why not just do whatever you want? Why care about anything? This is the fear that keeps people clinging to objective morality even when it clearly isn't working. The Forge philosophy offers a third path. Meaning isn't discovered or abandoned, it's created. Values aren't given or arbitrary. They're forged through process. We build ethics the way we build everything else, through iteration, testing, refinement, learning from failure. This matters because our current moment demands it. Traditional moral authorities are collapsing. Religious certainty can't answer questions about AI rights or climate policy. Appeals to nature fall apart under basic biology. Cultural traditions conflict across increasingly connected societies. We need a framework that works without claiming cosmic validation. The Forge philosophy acknowledges what's actually happening. Humans have always created values through trial and error, conflict and refinement. We've just pretended we were discovering pre-existing truths to make ourselves feel better. Making the process conscious doesn't make it less real. It makes it more effective. Without the Forge, you get two bad options. Either cling to failing traditional systems that can't adapt, or slide into relativism where everything's equally valid. The Forge rejects both. Values are constructed, yes, but not all constructions are equally good. Some survive stress testing, others shatter. We need this framework, because the old stories aren't working anymore and most people don't know how to create new ones. The Forge shows how. Faith, the first element. Faith gets a bad reputation in philosophical circles. It sounds like blind belief, wishful thinking, or refusing to engage with evidence. But in the Forge philosophy, faith means something different. Consciously chosen foundational commitments that provide a starting point for everything else. Think of faith as your axioms. In mathematics, you need axioms, statements assumed to be true without proof, before you can prove anything else. You can't prove that 1 + 1 2 without first accepting basic logical principles. Those principles aren't discovered, they're chosen as foundation. Your moral faith works the same way. You choose certain commitments as bedrock, knowing they can't be proven, but accepting them as necessary foundation. Maybe it's equality, the belief that all humans have equal worth. Maybe it's freedom, the conviction that autonomy matters more than security. Maybe it's harm reduction, the principle that suffering should be minimized. These aren't conclusions you reached through argument. They're starting points you chose, often absorbed from your culture, family, experiences, or narratives that resonated with you. You hold them a priori, before logical analysis, not because of it. Here's what makes Forge faith different from traditional religious faith. It's conscious and strategic. You know you're choosing these commitments. You understand they're not cosmic truths. You hold them because they're necessary for building the world you want, not because God commanded them or nature dictated them. My own example, I hold equality as bedrock faith even though I know it's wrong practically. Systems naturally create hierarchies. Some people are stronger, smarter, more capable in various ways. Inequality is the default state. But I choose equality anyway because without it, I can't build toward the world I want. It's a line carved in marble. This is strategic moral positioning. I hold equality specifically to resist future arguments, scientific, logical, or practical, that might justify human hierarchy. When someone inevitably discovers genetic differences in intelligence or capability, my equality axiom stands as defense, not because it's objectively true, but because I've chosen it as foundation. Faith in the Forge isn't passive acceptance, it's active commitment. You pick your bedrock, knowing you'll face pressure to abandon it. You choose your foundation, understanding that everything else you build depends on it holding firm. The key question isn't, can I prove this? The question is, what world am I trying to forge and what foundation does that require? Choose consciously. Choose strategically. Choose knowing you're choosing. That's faith in the Forge. Logic, the second element. Once you've chosen your faith, your foundational commitments, you need logic to build on that foundation. But logic in the Forge philosophy isn't about discovering eternal truths. It's provisional reasoning and strategic thinking, built on your chosen axioms. Logic is how you translate faith into action. Your bedrock commitments don't tell you what to do in specific situations. Believing in equality doesn't automatically solve questions about affirmative action or wealth redistribution. You need reasoning to connect principles to practice. This is where most ethical systems go wrong. They treat logic as if it operates independently of faith, as if pure reason can reach moral conclusions without foundational commitments. But that's impossible. You can't reason your way to ought from is, and you need axioms first. In the Forge, logic acknowledges its dependence on faith while still being rigorous. Given equality as an axiom, what policies follow? Given harm reduction as foundation, which practices make sense? Given freedom as bedrock, where do we draw boundaries? These are logical questions with provisional answers. The word provisional matters. Your logical conclusions aren't final truths. They're working hypotheses about what follows from your chosen axioms. They should be as rigorous as possible, using evidence and reasoning to build coherent structures. But they remain open to revision when conflict reveals flaws. Logic in the Forge has several key features. First, it's explicit about premises. You don't pretend your reasoning is objective when it rests on chosen commitments. You say, given my equality axiom, here's what follows, rather than claiming universal validity. Second, it's strategic. You're not just reasoning for the sake of consistency. You're building structures that need to survive contact with reality. Your logic should anticipate objections, identify weak points, and create resilient frameworks that adapt under pressure. Third, it's creative. Once you acknowledge you're building rather than discovering, logic becomes architectural. How do you construct the best possible structure on your chosen foundation? What supports what? Where are the stress points? What reinforcements make sense? This isn't relativism. Some logical structures are better than others, even with the same axioms. One person builds a shack, another builds a cathedral. Both start with the same foundation, but skill in logic determines what you create. The danger is treating logic as if it could work without faith or replace it. Pure rationalism fails because it needs axioms it can't provide. Faith without logic fails because it can't translate ideals into practice. You need both working together. Faith gives you direction. Logic gives you the path. Together they create structures worth testing. Conflict, the third element. This is where the Forge philosophy gets real. Faith gives you foundation. Logic builds structures on that foundation. But how do you know if what you've built actually works? Conflict. Conflict in the Forge isn't just disagreement or debate. It's reality stress testing your values. It's your ideals crashing into the world and discovering whether they survive. It's other people's bedrock colliding with yours with the force of tectonic plates. Think of conflict as the hammer. You've shaped your metal through faith and logic. Now you strike it against reality to see if it holds or shatters. No amount of theoretical reasoning tells you whether your values work. Only testing under pressure reveals that. This is uncomfortable because conflict means failure is possible. Your carefully constructed ethics might not survive contact with reality. Your bedrock commitments might generate unsustainable violence. Your logical structures might collapse when people with different foundations challenge them. Good, that's the point. The Forge specifically uses conflict to identify and destroy weak ideas. Values that can't survive stress testing shouldn't survive. Failures aren't shameful, they're data. They tell you what needs reinforcing or abandoning. Here's what makes conflict essential rather than destructive. It's the only source of genuine new information. Faith comes from you. Logic follows from faith. But conflict introduces the external. Other minds, other values, physical reality, unintended consequences. It's where your map meets the territory. Conflict operates at every scale. Personally, it's when your values face situations that test them. When equality means defending someone you despise, when harm reduction requires choosing between bad options. Socially, it's when different moral frameworks collide, when religious values meet secular rights, when collective good challenges individual freedom. Historically, it's when entire ethical systems face challenges they can't handle. Slavery tested whether American ideals of freedom were real or rhetoric. Climate change tests whether we actually value future generations. AI tests whether our concepts of consciousness and rights can adapt. The key is treating conflict as forge rather than battle. You're not trying to destroy other values or prove yours objectively correct. You're testing whether your constructions can withstand pressure while remaining functional. Sometimes that means adapting. Sometimes it means standing firm. The conflict itself reveals which. Conflict also forces clarity. Vague values like be good shatter immediately under pressure. You need specific, well-defended positions that can absorb hits and respond. The Forge burns away bullshit, leaving only what can survive. This is why the Forge philosophy embraces rather than avoids ethical tension. The heat is necessary. The pressure transforms. Without conflict, you're building untested theories. With it, you're forging functional values. The process. How it works now that we understand the three elements. The Forge philosophy isn't linear, it's cyclical. Faith, logic, and conflict feed into each other continuously, creating an iterative process of building, testing, and refining values. You start with faith, your chosen foundational commitments. These might come from culture, personal experience, narratives that resonate, or conscious deliberation about what world you want to forge. The origin matters less than the conscious recognition that you're choosing them as axioms. From that faith you build using logic. What follows from these commitments? What structures can you construct? What practices make sense given these foundations? This is strategic architecture, designing ethical frameworks that serve your chosen ends while being internally coherent. Then comes conflict. Your structures face reality. Other people with different foundations challenge your conclusions. Unexpected situations reveal flaws in your reasoning. The world itself pushes back against your constructions. Some parts hold, some crumble. Here's where it gets interesting. Failure isn't the end of the process. It's crucial data. When your values fail under conflict, you learn something. Maybe your logic was flawed. The reasoning didn't properly follow from your faith. Maybe your faith itself needs examination. The axioms generate unsustainable consequences. This creates a feedback loop. Conflict reveals weaknesses. You revise your logic to address them. If that doesn't work, You might even reconsider your faith, not abandoning your bedrock lightly, but recognizing when chosen axioms consistently fail to produce workable results. And this is critical. Some faith commitments are deliberately non-negotiable. These are your lines in marble, the foundations you've consciously chosen to defend regardless of pressure. The Forge philosophy doesn't require abandoning all principles when challenged. It requires understanding which commitments are bedrock versus which are provisional. The process accelerates through iteration. Each cycle through faith-logic conflict makes your values more refined, more resilient, better adapted to reality. Like tempering steel through repeated heating and cooling, your ethics strengthen through repeated construction and testing. This explains why some ideas persist across cultures and time periods. Concepts like justice, reciprocity, harm reduction keep recurring not because they're objective truths, but because they survive the forge better than alternatives. They generate less unsustainable violence. They adapt to different contexts. They hold up under pressure. The forge selects for what works through brutal natural selection of ideas. Values that consistently fail under stress die out. Values that adapt and survive spread. Over time, stronger ideas bubble to the surface through accumulated cycles of testing. This isn't moral relativism because not all constructions are equally good. Some survive the forge, some shatter. The process itself provides differential success without requiring cosmic validation. You're already in this process whether you know it or not. The question is whether you're conscious of it. Bedrock axioms, drawing your lines. One of the hardest questions in the Forge philosophy is which commitments deserve bedrock status. Not everything can be foundational. You'd have no room for adaptation or learning. But some lines need to be drawn in marble rather than sand. Bedrock axioms serve a specific purpose. They're commitments you hold regardless of logical arguments or practical challenges. They're not immune to revision, but you've consciously decided they're worth defending even when pressure comes. Take my equality example. I know equality is wrong practically. Systems create hierarchies naturally. People have different capabilities. Inequality is the default state. But I hold equality as bedrock anyway, because without it I can't build toward the world I want. This is strategic positioning. I choose equality specifically to resist future arguments that might justify human hierarchy. When someone inevitably points to genetic differences in intelligence or ability, my equality axiom stands as defense. When social Darwinists argue for natural hierarchies, my bedrock commitment says no. Here's what makes this different from dogmatic faith. I know I'm choosing it. I understand the practical challenges. I'm not pretending it's a cosmic truth. I'm consciously positioning this commitment as foundation, understanding that everything I build depends on it holding firm. Your bedrock axioms should meet several criteria. First, they should be genuinely foundational. Other values you hold depend on them. If you remove this axiom, major parts of your ethical framework would collapse. Second, they should be worth defending. You're going to face pressure to abandon or compromise these commitments. Make sure they're important enough to hold under stress. Don't waste bedrock status on preferences that don't really matter. Third, they should be sustainable over time. Some commitments generate so much conflict, they're impossible to maintain. Choose axioms that can survive reality's hammer without requiring constant, exhausting defense. Fourth, they should enable the world you want to forge. This is the strategic part. What foundations do you need to build toward your vision? What commitments are necessary rather than merely preferred? Common examples of bedrock axioms: bodily autonomy, free expression, harm reduction, consent, dignity. These show up across different ethical frameworks because they are structurally useful. They generate workable systems while being defensible under pressure. But your bedrock doesn't have to match anyone else's. The Forge philosophy is descriptive more than prescriptive. It explains how values work, not which values you must hold. Different foundations lead to different structures. The key is choosing consciously. One warning: don't mistake provisional conclusions for bedrock axioms. Many beliefs feel important, but are actually built on deeper foundations. Dig until you find what's truly foundational versus what's derived. Your actual bedrock is usually simpler than you think. Another warning: bedrock axioms must occasionally collide with other people's bedrock. This creates the kind of conflict that can't be resolved through logic, because you're operating from incompatible foundations. This is gravity, this is magnetic force. This is inevitable. When bedrock collides with bedrock, violence often follows. Recognizing this doesn't make it good. It makes it predictable and manageable. Understanding that some conflicts are foundational rather than logical helps you prepare rather than being surprised when compromise fails. Draw your lines carefully. Choose what's worth defending. Then defend it consciously, knowing you chose it for strategic reasons rather than discovered it through cosmic revelation. Will, community, self. The three dimensions. The Forge philosophy operates across three essential dimensions: will, community, and self. Remove anyone, and the Forge becomes trauma rather than transformation. All three must work together for ethical development to succeed. Will is the internal driving force. It's the conscious choice to engage with difficulty rather than avoid it, to transform through pressure rather than just endure it. Without will, the Forge crushes you. Circumstances beat you down without creating growth. Pain remains pain rather than becoming productive tension. Will doesn't mean being invulnerable or never feeling overwhelmed. It means maintaining agency even under pressure, believing you can direct your transformation rather than being randomly shaped by events. It's the difference between being metal and being the blacksmith. This connects to faith in interesting ways. Your bedrock commitments give you something to anchor will to when pressure intensifies. When you know what you're defending and why, you can maintain agency under stress. Without that foundation, will becomes arbitrary, just stubbornness without direction. Community is the social container that makes transformation safe rather than destructive. Individual forging without community often leads to isolation, radicalization, or breakdown. You need others to provide perspective, support, accountability, and reality testing that you can't do alone. Community serves multiple functions in the Forge. It holds you when transformation becomes overwhelming. It challenges you when you're drifting toward comfortable delusion. It validates genuine growth while calling out mere performance. It provides different perspectives that stress test your logic from angles you can't see. But community can also be what needs forging. Sometimes the social container itself applies destructive rather than creative pressure. Toxic communities, oppressive systems, or groups stuck in failing patterns might be part of what requires transformation. This creates a paradox. You need community to forge effectively, but sometimes community itself is what needs the forge. Self is the consciousness undergoing change. This is the awareness that knows it's in the forge, that can reflect on its own transformation, that maintains continuity even as everything else shifts. Without self-awareness, the process becomes unconscious and you don't direct your own forging. Self isn't fixed or eternal. It's more like a process that observes and guides its own transformation. You're both the metal being hammered and the consciousness aware of being hammered. This dual nature lets you participate in your own forging rather than just being shaped passively. The three dimensions work together in a pattern. As above, so below. What forges an individual also forges a community, which also forges a civilization. The same structure operates at every scale. Will, community, and self interacting to create transformation through pressure. At the individual level, your will engages with difficulty. Your community provides containment. Your self maintains awareness. At the social level, collective will drives change. Social structures provide containment. Cultural self-awareness guides development. Reality and will must meet. Will without reality becomes fantasy. You're trying to forge values disconnected from actual constraints. Reality without will becomes victimhood. You're being shaped by circumstances without agency. The Forge requires both, engaging consciously with what actually is. When all three dimensions align, transformation accelerates. Your will provides energy. Your community provides structure. Your self provides direction. The Forge burns hot but doesn't destroy. Pressure transforms rather than breaks. You emerge harder, sharper, more functional. When dimensions misalign, the Forge fails. Will without community leads to isolation. Community without self leads to unconscious conformity. Self without will leads to passive observation rather than active transformation. The Forge philosophy asks, can you maintain will under pressure? Can you find or create healthy community? Can you develop self-awareness that survives transformation? These aren't easy questions. They're the work of a lifetime. Applications using the Forge understanding. The Forge philosophy matters most when you apply it. Here's how this framework helps you navigate real situations, make better decisions, and build more resilient values. Start with self-diagnosis. What are your actual bedrock axioms versus provisional conclusions? Many people haven't examined their foundations. They hold beliefs inherited from culture or family without conscious examination. The Forge asks you to identify what's truly bedrock, what you defend even under pressure, versus what's negotiable. Try this exercise. List your important values. For each one, ask, why do I believe this? Keep asking why until you hit something you can't explain further. That's closer to bedrock. Then ask, am I willing to defend this even when it's difficult? If yes, you've found an axiom. If no, it's provisional. Once you know your foundations, examine your logic. Do your day-to-day actions actually follow from your stated axioms? Many people have massive gaps between bedrock commitments and daily behavior. They claim to value equality but tolerate systemic injustice. They say freedom matters but support authoritarian policies when scared. The Forge demands coherence. Your logic should connect faith to action without too many contradictions. Some tension is inevitable. Reality is complex. But if your behavior consistently contradicts your stated values, either your behavior needs to change or your stated values aren't actually bedrock. Then invite conflict. This feels counterintuitive. Most ethical frameworks try to avoid conflict, but the Forge uses it deliberately. Seek out people with different foundations. Engage with challenges to your positions. Put your values in situations that stress test them. This doesn't mean being needlessly argumentative or seeking out abuse. It means creating productive tension that reveals whether your constructions hold up. Read perspectives you disagree with. Have conversations with people from different traditions. Face situations that make your values difficult to maintain. When conflict reveals failures, resist defensiveness. Failure is data. Your values didn't survive stress testing in this instance. What does that tell you? Maybe your logic was flawed and needs adjustment. Maybe your situation revealed edge cases your framework can't handle. Maybe your bedrock itself generates unsustainable consequences. Use failure to refine. If your logic failed but your faith seems sound, rebuild the reasoning. If your faith consistently generates problems, consider whether those axioms serve the world you're trying to forge. This isn't abandoning principles at the first challenge. It's honest assessment of whether your constructions work. Apply the 3 dimensions check. When facing difficulty, ask, do I have will to engage rather than avoid? Do I have community that supports transformation? Do I have self-awareness to direct the process? If any dimension is missing, that's where to focus first. For group situations, use the Forge to understand conflict. When people argue about values, are they operating from different bedrock axioms? If so, you're facing a foundational collision that logic alone can't resolve. Recognizing this, shift the conversation from who's right to what different foundations are we building from. This helps navigate political disagreements, interpersonal conflicts, and cultural tensions. Instead of assuming the other person is stupid or evil, you can identify when you're building from incompatible foundations. This doesn't resolve the conflict. Bedrock collisions are real, but it makes them more productive. Use the Forge to evaluate new ideas. When someone presents an ethical framework, ask, what's their faith? What axioms are they starting from? What's their logic? How do they connect foundation to practice? What conflicts has this framework faced and survived? Ideas that can't answer these questions clearly are probably untested theory. Ideas that have survived serious conflict while maintaining coherence are worth considering, even if you disagree with their foundations. Finally, apply the Forge to yourself continuously. You're always forging whether you know it or not. Making it conscious just makes it strategic. Regular check-ins. Are my actions following from my stated values? Am I avoiding necessary conflict? Have I confused provisional conclusions with bedrock axioms? The Forge philosophy isn't a destination, it's a practice. You never finish forging values. You continuously construct, test, refine, and rebuild. But consciousness transforms random suffering into purposeful transformation. Conclusion: becoming a conscious forger. You are already a forge. You've always been taking experience and creating meaning from it. You've always been holding commitments, building structures of reason on them, and having those structures tested by reality. The Forge philosophy just makes this process conscious and strategic. This matters because conscious forging is more effective than unconscious forging. When you understand the process, You can work with it rather than being randomly shaped by it. You can choose your bedrock deliberately. You can build logic that serves your chosen ends. You can invite conflict productively rather than being ambushed by it. The key recognitions to take forward. First, there are no objective moral truths to discover. You're not finding pre-existing answers. You're constructing workable values. This isn't nihilism. It's taking responsibility for meaning-making. Second, faith-logic conflict is the engine of ethical development. Your axioms provide foundation. Your reasoning builds structures. Reality tests everything. This cycle continuously refines what you've built, strengthening what survives and destroying what doesn't. Third, bedrock axioms serve strategic purposes. You hold certain commitments as foundational, not because they're objectively true, but because they're necessary for forging the world you want. Choose them consciously and defend them deliberately. Fourth, all three dimensions must work together. Will provides energy to engage with difficulty. Community provides structure that makes transformation safe. Self provides awareness that directs the process. Without all three, the forge becomes trauma. Fifth, failure is crucial data rather than shameful defeat. When your values don't survive stress testing, you learn something. Use that information to revise logic or reconsider faith. The forge specifically uses failure to strengthen what you build. Sixth, the process never ends. You don't finish forging values and then maintain them forever. You continuously construct, test, refine, and rebuild. This isn't exhausting, it's how consciousness works. You're doing it anyway. Making it conscious just makes it purposeful. The hardest part about the Forge philosophy is accepting that you're building rather than discovering. Most people want cosmic validation for their values. They want to believe they're following objective truth rather than creating functional meaning. The Forge asks you to release that comfort and embrace the responsibility of construction. But here's what you gain: clarity about what you're actually doing, strategic control over the process, resilience when values are challenged, and honesty about the nature of ethics. You stop pretending your values are universal truths and start defending them as chosen commitments worth holding. This makes you more effective rather than less. When you know you're building, you can build better. When you know you're testing, you can test more rigorously. When you know failure is data, you can learn faster. Conscious forging outperforms unconscious forging. The Forge philosophy also gives you language for understanding others. When people disagree, you can identify whether they're operating from different bedrock axioms, flawed logic, or insufficient conflict testing. This doesn't make disagreement disappear, but it makes it more productive. You can recognize when someone's values have never faced serious stress testing, their untested theory. You can identify when logic has become disconnected from faith, elaborate reasoning built on foundations the person can't actually defend. You can see when someone's treating provisional conclusions as bedrock, defending positions that don't actually matter. Most importantly, the Forge philosophy kills the false dichotomy between objective morality and nihilistic relativism. You don't need cosmic truths to have genuine ethics. You don't need divine command to hold commitments worth defending. You forge values that work, that survive reality's hammer, that serve the world you're consciously building. This is the practice. Know your foundations, build coherent structures on them, invite reality to test what you've built, learn from failures, revise and rebuild. Do this continuously, consciously, strategically. You're a forge. Start acting like it. The fire's always burning. The question is whether you're directing it or just being shaped by it randomly. Welcome to Conscious Forging. The work starts now.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more. Share to help the channel grow.